Good afternoon, y'all. My name is Chandra Villanueva, and I am the Economic Opportunity Program Director here with CPPP. Thanks all of you for coming out. It's so great to see so many familiar faces. A lot of you know me as the school finance geek that likes to knit in the House and Senate galleries and post silly pictures of my cat on the internet. But what a lot of you don't know about me is that I have a very non-traditional path to through education. I dropped out of high school when I was 16 years old, earned a GED, and eventually made it to NYU for graduate school. And this... And having this non-traditional path really made me passionate about access to higher education. If I wasn't able to access higher education through community college, going to an affordable state school, I would have never made it to NYU and I wouldn't be on this stage today. So that's why I'm really passionate about this issue, and I'm really excited that CPPP is partnering with Education Trust to address inequities in higher education across the state of Texas. And as you know, a staunch public education advocate, it's my great honor today to introduce our keynote speaker for you all, Secretary John B. King Jr. Secretary King is the president and CEO of Education Trust, a national nonprofit organization that seeks to identify and close opportunity and achievement gaps from preschool all the way through college. King served as President Barack Obama's Secretary of Education, and in tapping him to lead the U.S. Department of Education, President Obama called King an exceptionally talented educator, citing his commitment to preparing every child for success. And his lifelong dedication to education as a teacher, a principal, and leader of schools and school systems. Before becoming Education Secretary, Secretary King carried out the duties of the U.S. Department, or Deputy Secretary of Education, overseeing all policies and programs related to pre-kindergarten through 12th grade education, English language learners, special education, and innovation. And in his role, he also oversaw the department's following the 10-year, in his role, King also oversaw the agency's operations. King joined the department following his tenure as the first African American and Puerto Rican to serve as the New York State Education Commissioner. King began his career in education as a high school social studies teacher in Puerto Rico and Boston, Massachusetts, and as a middle school principal. So with that, I just want to welcome Secretary John B. King Jr. Please come up.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the Center for Public Policy Priorities for inviting me to join you all today for this conversation. It's an honor to be in Texas. It's an honor to be here with Texas icons, Speaker Straus, of course. Had the honor to meet Lucy Baines Johnson, and certainly an honor to join Mrs. Cisneros here today. I want to thank Speaker Straus for his leadership on behalf of education equity, being someone who is deeply committed to funding public education, and I'm grateful to the Speaker and CPPP for working over a long period of time to build a bipartisan movement for investment in public education. It's of course also a privilege to celebrate Chris Harris and the work that he's doing on criminal justice reform, which is really ultimately, I think, and you heard this in Chris's remarks, about recognizing the humanity in people who need a second chance. And I'm particularly grateful for the work that Chris does because I'm a person who wouldn't be standing in front of you if not for the second chances that I was given. I wouldn't be standing here in front of you if not for the opportunities that public education created for me. I grew up in New York City. I grew up in Brooklyn. Both my parents were New York City public school educators. My father, a teacher and principal and administrator. My mother was the school counselor in my elementary school. I always say I was a very well-behaved elementary school student as a result. And my parents gave their whole lives to the New York City public schools, but they could not have known the difference that New York City schools would make in the life of their child. My mom passed away when I was 8, October of 4th grade. I lived after my mom passed away with my dad, who was very sick with undiagnosed Alzheimer's. So home was this place that was scary and inconsistent and unstable. I didn't know what my father would be like from one night to the next. I can recall one night when he woke me up at 2 a.m, told me it was time to go to school. I remember being on the staircase in our house, holding on to the banister as my father pulled me on the stairs, and I insisted to him, Daddy, it's not time to go to school, it's not time to go to school, and he insisted that it was, and I didn't know why. I didn't know why he was acting that way. I didn't know why that's what home was like. But the thing that saved me was school. Having a series of amazing New York City public school teachers who made school a place that was safe, consistent, and nurturing. I remember the things we did in 4th, 5th, 6th grade like it was yesterday. I had a teacher, Mr. Osterwell. He actually looped with us in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, which is very unusual. In his classroom, we read the New York Times every day. We learned the leader and capital of every country in the world. We did theater productions. We did a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare in elementary school. We did a production of Alice in Wonderland. I was the Rose in Alice in Wonderland with big red felt petals sticking out of my head. Right? But I remember the things that we did in his classroom like it was yesterday because that saved my life. Having a place that was nurturing and supportive saved my life. Having an influence in my life like Mr. Osterwell gave me a sense of hope and possibility when I didn't experience any of that at home. As my father got more and more sick, I took on more and more responsibility at home. I can recall at one point my father stopped going out of the house, and I was so hungry. I remember being so hungry and wondering how are we going to get food in the house. And I remember the day that I decided to sneak into my father's room because there was a drawer that I knew had money in it, and I felt so bad about stealing, but I was so hungry. And I got that money and got food in our house, and that's what life was like. My father passed when I was 12. I moved around different family members, different schools, and the thing that made the difference was always teachers. But it wasn't a straight line, and this goes to the work that Chris does. Like many kids who experience trauma, I got in a lot of trouble in high school. I always tell folks I'm the first U.S. Secretary of Education to have been kicked out of high school. But I hope that I'm not the last. Right? Because people could very easily have said, here's an African-American, Latino male, family in crisis, in trouble in school, no respect for authority. New York City public schools, what chance does he have? And given up on me. But I'm standing here today because there were a set of teachers and a school counselor and mentors and some family members who chose to see me as more than the sum of my mistakes. They chose to see more hope and possibility in me than I could see in myself. They gave me a second chance, and that put me on the path to becoming an educator and to all the things that I've been able to work on in my life. I became a teacher and a principal with the commitment to try to do for other young people what educators had done for me. And I share this with you because there's such urgency to this work. The work of making schools great for all kids is the work of protecting the long-term health and well-being of our economy and our democracy. Here in Texas, you understand that. I'm encouraged by the investment that HB 3 represents and the possibility of greater investment in public education, but no one bill, no one legislative session is enough. We have all got to work to make sure that schools are great for all of our kids, and the stakes couldn't be higher. If you look at the Texas Kids Count Project, about half of the children in Texas are Latino, about 12% or more are African American, 4% are Asian, 3% are multiracial. 60% of kids are from low-income families. The reality is that if Texas fails to educate low-income students and students of color, Texas has no future. Just as if we fail as a society to ensure educational opportunity for all, our future will be dim. To paraphrase one of Texas' most famous native sons, Lucy's father, tomorrow is ours to win or lose. And the question for Texas is, what will it take to win? What will it take to win the future. Now, there are important assets, the growth and dynamism of Texas, the fact that Texas has the fastest growing population in the country, the diversity and the recognition and valuing of diversity in Texas, the fact that 1 in 10 children in the United States, maybe more now, are from Texas, the strong public higher education system in Texas. These are assets for building a better future, but winning the future requires a focus on education equity. And so I want to talk for a moment about what that requires. One, I believe it requires a commitment to invest in early childhood education. We know that there is an 8-to-1, 9-to-1 return on investment for every dollar invested in early childhood education. We know that despite that truth, in Texas, less than half of 4-year-olds are enrolled in public preschool, and less than 10% of 3-year-olds are in public preschool programs. We must do better on investing in early childhood education. We know that Latino students and low-income students are underrepresented in public preschool programs, and we know the programs have to be high quality. That's not just about access. Quality is essential. And quality means when you walk into a preschool classroom, it has to be a place not only of learning but of joy. That you have to see kids at the water table testing to see what sinks or floats. You have to see kids in what we used to call the dress-up area, but now it's called the dramatic play area. But you got to see kids in the dramatic play area trying on costumes, because that's about, Speaker Straus talked about the idea of seeing the world from someone else's perspective. Right? That begins for some kids in the dress-up area, right? Where they're thinking about trying on different identities, different experiences, building their creativity. Think about the early engineering that takes place with the kid who's building a house out of blocks. That's what quality preschool needs to look like, but that requires real investment. In K-12, we know that the outcomes have to be stronger. There are good signs in Texas. Reading scores for African-American fourth graders, for example, are above the U.S. average. That's encouraging. But the reality is that reading scores overall for Texas are near the bottom in performance for the country. Only 3 in 10 of Texas fourth graders scored proficient in reading. And the reality is early elementary school is about learning to read, but the rest of school is about reading to learn. And if you don't get to fourth grade with strong reading skills, you will be hampered in your further education. We know from the STAR results that there are big gaps for African American and Latino students, and so we have to close those gaps. That means not only investing in K-12 education, but ensuring the quality of instructional experience for kids. Ultimately, school is about the relationship between teachers and adults and the work in which they are engaged. That means all kids need a rich curriculum, not just English and math, but science and social studies and art and music. It means all kids need access to advanced coursework, whether that's advanced placement courses or international baccalaureate or dual enrollment or high-quality career and technical education. And again, there must be vigilance about quality. It's important that in Texas there's been a significant increase in kids doing dual enrollment, where they're taking college courses as high school students. But everyone who's visited a dual enrollment program knows that some of them are high quality, where kids are doing the exact kind of work that a college class would require. They're reading the same text, taking the same assessments, taught by the same faculty. But there are other dual enrollment programs that are just high school classes masquerading as college classes. So quality matters. Vigilance about quality matters. Education for equity means that we need a strong and diverse teacher workforce. Texas is doing well on the teacher diversity front compared to other states, with 27% of teachers in Texas being Latino and about 10% of teachers being African American. But vigilance will be required to ensure that the teaching profession and that the ranks of our principals are diverse and that they're well prepared and well supported. We have to reward excellence. I think about the work that's happening in Dallas with the ACE model, which is about saying that we need to reward excellence from our educators, we need to invest in their ongoing professional development, and we need to place our strongest educators with our kids who are most vulnerable. Education for equity also means environments that address kids' socio-emotional needs. Consider that in the United States, About 18% of the kids in pre-K are African American, but 48% of the kids in pre-K who are suspended for a day or more are African American. 4-year-olds told, go home, school is not for you. We would never do that. We would never do that with math. We would never say, you failed this math quiz, no more math for you. But we do say that about the socio-emotional environment. We have to get better, which means we have to invest in school counselors and mental health services, the training of teachers to be trauma-informed in their practice. Consider that in the United States, there are 1.6 million students who go to a school where there is a sworn law enforcement officer and no school counselor. That is the school-to-prison pipeline in a single data point. Right? Because in those schools, the struggles that kids have are referred to law enforcement rather than referred to educators who can support kids' socio-emotional development. Education for equity also means that we have to reject the false dichotomy between those who argue that school can solve everything and those who argue that there's nothing school can do unless you fix poverty first. Both are false. At the end of the day, we need to do more for kids inside of school and more for kids outside of school. That's right. There was a recent study done at Johns Hopkins on vision. It's a shocking study, shocking findings. They looked at the students and they figured out that if you can't see the board or read the book, you do worse in school. Shocking, I know. And then they had an intervention. Again, shocking findings. If you address kids' vision needs and they can see the board or read the book, wait for it. Kids do better in school, right? So I make light of this study not because the study wasn't important, but because we ought to be disappointed in ourselves that despite that study, there are still kids right here in Texas who are failing to learn to read in a classroom because they haven't gotten proper vision care. Right, that's why I say we have to reject the false dichotomy that's all about inside of school or outside of school. It is both. It must be both. And it's not enough to get students to high school graduation. And I hope that there will be a statewide conversation about the work that needs to happen in higher education in order to achieve the 60 by 30 goal. Right, that goal can be helped by strengthening K-12, but higher ed also has a responsibility, not only to enroll students, but to ensure they have the support necessary to graduate. I think about the work that Georgia State is doing. Georgia State is a higher ed institution that essentially eliminated the gap in graduation rates for low-income students and students of color. And they've done it through a mix of intrusive advising, what I would call nagging, and emergency grants, just-in-time grants to help students navigate financial difficulties. But at Georgia State, if you fail a midterm, your advisor calls you and says, hey, I see you failed your midterm. What's your plan? Have you gone to office hours? Have you gone to tutoring? Are you part of a study group? What are you going to do to fix this? Right? If you register for a class that is going to help you get to graduation in your major, the advisor calls you and says, I see you registered for this class. It's not the right one. Come in and see me. Right, it's what all of us would do for our own kids to help them get to graduation. We have to do more of that work in higher ed if we want students to actually graduate, which is the key to their economic opportunity. The stakes couldn't be higher for the state, and Speaker Straus referenced this. There are more jobs available in the state than there are unemployed people, and sadly, many of the unemployed people don't have the skills they need for those jobs. That is a crisis for the long-term health of the state. And so the key is to make sure that students not only graduate high school, but go on to meaningful post-secondary opportunities, whether that's an associate's, a bachelor's, or a career certificate, and that when they get those credentials, they are meaningful and ready to succeed in the workplace. So let me close with this. Let me share the story of two of my students when I was a middle school principal, who I think about every day. Every day I think about Herman Taylor. Herman was a kid who came to my middle school as a 6th grader. He was very behind academically. He struggled quite a bit in 6th grade and 7th grade, but he came to tutoring, he worked hard, and he got better, and he got better grades, and by the time he got to high school, he was doing well in school. He was a very successful high school athlete, and he was on track for going to college. And then one day, Herman got off the bus and he was killed. He was killed in street violence in Boston, which is all too common there and across the country. And I think every day about Herman and the lost opportunity his life represents for all of us, what he could have contributed. But I also think about the young man who shot Herman, the young man who killed Herman, because that young man was in some kindergarten class somewhere, hand raised, trying to answer a question. And a series of events happened in his life that brought him to that moment. And both his life and Herman's life ended in many ways that day. We have to do better. The reason I'm committed to a life and education policy is for Herman. We have to do better so that kids like Herman have the opportunity to make of their lives what they will. And we have to do better for kids like the kid who shot Herman. We've got to find a way to make sure all of our young people find a way to become productive, positive citizens in our society. But I also think every day about Chandra Tyler. Now, Chandra Tyler came to Roxbury Prep, the school that I started, the middle school I started, as a 6th grader. She also struggled. She got in trouble a fair amount when she first came to the school. What I didn't know at the time, but know now, is that part of why she was struggling is because her brother had been killed in street violence in Boston, and she and her mom were struggling with that. China struggled to adjust, but she got better and she got it together, and she became not only a strong student, a stellar student, and a stellar athlete as well. And she went on to success in high school and college. And when I was secretary, I had the opportunity to call Chandra Tyler to congratulate her when she was elected to the Massachusetts State Legislature to represent our community. And I said to China, I'm so excited for you. Do you want to come visit the White House? I'll set that up for you. And she said, yeah, I'd love to do that. And I said, great. I will set it up for you and your mom to come to the White House. And there's a long pause. And China says, well, actually, I was thinking I would bring my chief of staff. And I thought, right, because you're not 12 anymore. You don't go everywhere with your mom, which is how China occurred to me. But I will never forget the day of visiting China in her office and then walking down to the floor of the Massachusetts State House and standing in front of her desk on the floor of the Massachusetts State House. And so we need more Chinas. We need more leaders like Speaker Straus. We need folks who are committed to the role that public education plays in our society. We need more people who are true to the legacy of President Johnson, who understand, as he did as a former teacher, the value of education to the long-term health and well-being of our society. And as we do that, we need to be champions for equity. We need to confront the reality that too often kids of color and low-income students and our English learners don't have access to the full range of opportunities. And that is deeply embedded in our history, and we can and must do better. There is nothing wrong in public education that can't be fixed by what is right in public education. All over the country, there are people doing great things in schools. The challenge for us is, can we scale those things, not for some, but for all? It's an honor to spend time with all of you, because you can be the difference. For a kid whose life depends on it the way mine did, you can be the difference in their quality of education by standing with CPPP, by standing with leaders like Speaker Straus to demand that we provide an excellent and equitable education for all our kids. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for the opportunity to join you.